All right. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you're coming in from today. Welcome. Curtis and I are excited to be here. We were here a couple, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, talking about LTL pricing. We got some really good feedback, so we thought we'd keep that LTL ball rolling. And today we're going to talk through LTL performance. I'm going to drop the carrier name for now and just call it performance. But hey, Curtis, how you doing?
Good, good, Jill. How are you? Happy February.
You too. You've got quite a view. I don't know if you want to share where you are today.
Yeah, well, I'm just enjoying the last few hours of Utah and then headed down to Vegas for the Manifest conference. So I love it out here. Having grown up in the West, Western Canada, it's a good reminder of just being able to see mountains and seeing long distances. You can't beat it.
No, it's so beautiful. I'm glad you got a little fun in before you're off to working.
Yeah.
Good for you. Good. All right. So I think we are just going to dive in and get started. We've got a lot to cover today. As Curtis and I were kind of going through what we wanted to share today, it became very clear that we could probably do a couple of hours on a bunch of these topics. So we're going to hit the high notes today. Please ask any questions along the way. I'm pretty sure there's a chat. And at any point, you want to reach out to us afterwards, please feel free. So let's get started. As we think about performance, you often, your mind goes right away to carrier performance. And in our world, we see performance as really three pillars. We see shipper performance, carrier performance, consignee performance. And if you're not thinking about it that way, you're really at a disadvantage. So often carriers are not treated as partners. And if you can treat your carriers as a partnership, you are going to get a much better service with the right carrier at the right price. And so, in our minds here at Freight Plus, performance, if you're a shipper, starts with you. It absolutely starts with you.
Absolutely. It's got to be holistic because just like a doctor can't look at one specific body part without seeing what's upstream or downstream. It not only is, the shipper and consignee aspects both really important, but I think that each of the three entities or parties here in the arrangement should not only have a good handle on their performance, but also, who's upstream and downstream from them, looking through their lens.
Yeah, I agree. So that's a great segue, Curtis, because I'm gonna hand it over. I'd like you to talk through where to start, which starts with orders, right? So we're going to do a little deeper dive into order lead times, carrier stated transit, and then planning and scheduling against both lead time and carrier stated transit. Next slide, please.
All right. So we're calling this shipper performance. And you'll see a trend or a theme throughout this as we look at shipper, carrier, consignee, and then digital. But it really is true. So I've talked before about LTL's kind of in a tough spot, I think, because a lot of the time it's customers want precise parcel like transit and information and performance, but there's a lot of unquantifiables and nuances that are more like truckload, where you're talking, you might pick up freight that's not anywhere near the size you thought it was, or you weren't even told at all. So, kind of that, leading the horse to water essentially as a shipper, you've got to really have your own planning and preparation, and really you're advocating for yourself and your company, but also you're being a good partner. So you've got to know, you know, this order, this product, whatever it is I'm shipping to my customer, when does it need to be there? What is that a firm date, or is that kind of flexible based on when my customer at the end of the line needs it? And that, working backwards from that will then inform you on when does it need to be picked, packed, weighed, dimensioned before it gets given to the carrier? When does it need to be tendered over? With hopefully digital freight tendering through EDI or API.
Yeah.
So
And just to add
all of
some
that is
context.
a huge. Please, yep.
Oh, sorry, Curtis. I agree. And I think, as we have grown into this managed trans service, we spend a lot of time looking at order lead times. So our customers, we are integrated with their tools, and they'll drop an order to us from their ERP system, and they look as though they're giving a target pickup date. They're giving us 4 days to plan that order, which is really good lead time, right? However, they're in an outside warehouse, and that outside warehouse isn't actually allowing us to plan any freight until 24 hours and sometimes noontime the day before pickup. Well, you've just taken that lead time of 4 days and drilled it down into 4 hours. And so, really understanding your lead times as a shipper is incredibly important. And
Yep.
again, we spend a lot of time in lead time. And I think where you're going, Curtis, is then that actually, if you really understand your lead times, that will give you the ability then to really then take the next measurement of that carrier stated transit.
Yeah, so that's why we spend so much time and effort at Freight Plus trying to get as far up the path with our clients and as fully integrated, fully connected. We say 4 wide, 4 deep. So across multiple client departments, it doesn't matter what business you're in. The more lead time, the more time you have to plan, is always going to be a cost reducer. It's the same as if the shipper, would they rather have their customer call them and say, hey, I need X amount of product in 2 weeks, or I need it tomorrow? Like anybody that gets last minute requests as a business is going to be scrambling. You're going to be cutting corners, which are typically higher cost in the end. So yeah, just loading. It all starts with the shipper, how they prepare, inform, and then essentially kick off this whole process of the carriers moving the goods.
Yep. And so I think to wrap here up, again, really understanding your lead times. And I think also what I heard from you, Curtis, is accuracy in those dates. If your dates aren't accurate and then you want to measure against them, you're kind of in a world of trouble, right? So really understanding order lead time and then understanding dates, that will give you the ability to make the right decision on what carrier is going to be able to manage the proper transit to pick up and deliver this freight. And
Yeah.
we'll get into it a little bit too, is also it's very important that you understand what your customer requirements are, because if they are requiring appointments, meaning the carrier needs to contact the customer to make that delivery appointment ahead of delivering, you've got to add that time into your lead time, because some of these customers take a really long time to reply with an appointment, believe it or not. And so, again, that all speaks back to your lead time. So, shipper performance, we're going to say it again. It starts with you and really understanding order lead times, and then how you're planning against both your lead time and your carrier transit. You must have a deep dive. You really have to understand it in order to pull this off and get the right service. And to Curtis's point, LTL is different. You hear all the time modes of transportation are unique, but LTL is a mode that is unique. Curtis, the driver, is not picking up your freight at the shipper. Curtis, the driver, is not the same driver who's going to be delivering your freight to the customer. This freight makes a lot of moves in between. It's why it's critical these dates absolutely are accurate, and then you can measure against those dates.
Yeah, it's a good point. We've talked a lot before. The reason why LTL carriers are used so often, especially when it's precision shipments, and there are delivery appointments, sometimes pickup appointments too, which we see a lot of in the food and beverage world. Um, they have the network, they have the density of freight. They can do those things 9 times out of 10 or maybe more efficiently and at the right cost. But what that also means is they can't have all these exceptions to their process and all these nuances. So in referencing, the LTL carrier will typically want to make that appointment that's understandable, right? They're planning their pickup and delivery routes every night. They're sending, 10 to 60 drivers out into their market, depending on where they are. And you can't be having these one-off requests and appointments that are set up by the customer. It has to be turned over to them. So
Right.
it does provide a little more potential for friction or for gaps, but again, that's why the planning and the lead up to knowing what you expect, what your customer expects, and then which carrier or even which mode is capable of delivering that is so important.
Yep. Agreed. Agreed. So I think once you have a handle on that, which isn't an easy feat, you then want to understand how those orders moved and if they hit these target dates that you were expecting. And so if we want to hit the next slide, we will touch on really measuring performance. And we call this carrier performance. And think about if you're doing this right, you're in a digital environment. Where you have orders that are being tendered to carriers and you have an expected ship date and you have an expected delivery date. And then in between, your carrier most likely will need to make an appointment for either that pickup or delivery. So lots of dates, right? And so what we suggest as a best practice and what we require of our teams here is that we're measuring all those dates. So we will measure carrier performance against on-time pickup. We will measure that performance against the pickup request. You don't see this as much as you do on deliveries with big box retailers, grocery warehouses. That planning the appointment takes time. So as we talked about earlier, having that order lead time is really important. You have appointments at Amazon, at UNFI, at Home Depot, at Lowe's, at big box retail grocery warehouse. Sometimes they take 4 to 7 days to actually reply to a portal that you went into to request a delivery appointment, right? And you're not even considering that as you're doing your fulfillment and planning of order distribution. So it's really important that you start thinking about those things. And measuring this performance. Imagine a world where you could sit with your LTL carrier on a monthly cadence and you've actually measured all these things for yourself. And then you sit with those carriers. Again, if you think about this as a partnership, not I just asked them for a rate and took a pricing tariff or agreement from them. But if you really think about this as a partnership, you should have this data visibility available to you as a shipper. You should be measuring this yourself. The carriers will measure it as well. And then you can have some real good conversations. Curtis and I can give you an example. We have a client in the food business, and one of their largest customers, they were missing the carrier was missing the delivery appointment target. It wasn't the appointment. It was the customer target delivery date, right? And our client was getting charged back. And so Curtis and his team digs in. And what we find is the carrier has a portal into the customer's web tool that they have to make appointments in. And every single time our carrier, their carrier, was going in almost a week ahead of when the shipment needed to be delivered based on customer target date, requesting that appointment. And they were getting appointments anywhere from 4 to 7 days on average after the customer target delivery date. And everyone believes this is a carrier issue. And lo and behold, our shipper's customer, they were like 14 trailers behind at this one distribution center. So the idea that the carrier was ever going to meet the shipper's requested delivery date, it was never going to happen. And without these metrics, right, Curtis, we wouldn't have known.
Right. Yeah. No, it starts with the metric. Man, this could be a whole series in itself.
It really could.
Just carrier transit and performance.
And wouldn't you agree, we spend a lot of time here with customers. We spend a real lot of time here. Because the knee-jerk reaction is carrier failed us. And lo and behold, sometimes carrier did fail you. But plenty of other times, there's not enough time to make that appointment. The customer's having issues, right?
Yeah, it's we see it both ways. I mean,
Mhm.
one of the common ones, especially again in the food vertical, is the carrier bids, they give pricing, they accept the award, and then we may find out later that they do service that delivery point, but it's like just specific days of the week. And so,
Right.
which again, understandable. They if it's far from their terminal and they know that a driver's probably going to be tied up there while the lumper service does their thing, it's not cost effective for them to send one pallet at a time in there. So, but it's all about information and getting that up front.
And
Um,
to that point, I think as you go through and your team goes through these strategic sourcing strategies, again, back to the partnership, we will ask our shippers to provide their customer route guides. Because to your point, Curtis, we just went through this with a really large customer in Target, where Target, under their agreement with the shipper, had all these requirements for delivery. Now, Target has many, many, many distribution centers across the US. And what was happening was shipments were seen as failures, right? These shipments were not making the target delivery dates. And so Curtis and his team does a deep dive, again, starting with lead time. Did we have enough time? Did we give the carriers enough time to make those appointments? And then what we were finding repeatedly is Target, as a corporation under the contract with the customer, was saying, you need to make live deliveries on Tuesdays and Thursdays for these shipments in this DC. And the DC is saying, that's never going to happen. We're on a drop trailer program only. Or the
right.
flip was happening. And so shippers are really, they're at the mercy of their customers. They have to follow their requirements or they're going to get charged back. And if you don't have a real good way using tools, understanding what you should be measuring to prove them wrong, you've got these chargebacks that you're fighting with no good information to do so. It really puts you in the defense versus the driver's seat if you're measuring this correctly.
Right. I think we need to point out too just the importance in getting the pickup done right. You referred to it a little bit ago, but and that really flows from the shipper performance, that we just talked about.
Yeah.
Typically, pickup percentages are higher than on-time delivery percentages, but when it does go wrong and there's a missed pickup, usually we see everything downhill from there is equally messed up. So, getting that pickup done, getting the whole process off on the right foot is a huge differentiator. And then it's also, we should point out, it's a little confusing right now the way LTL carriers confirm pickup. They get sent, a tender or an email, website request, whatever. However they receive a pickup request, they'll send back a confirmation number. But as far as, how they grade the performance aspect, it's
Mm-hmm.
not really a shipment until it's on their truck.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning if they do miss a pickup on a Monday and then they go and get it on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, they're going to start their performance scorecarding for themselves on that day it picked up. And then from that day it moves forward, they're measuring against their transit times. So I think
That's such
that
a great call out.
that may change. Like there with the LTL Digital Council, there's work being done right now on like a pre-pickup API that will show visibility to where the driver and truck is and when you might expect them to bump your dock. And so I think by default, if they're showing visibility and transparency before they actually get the freight on their truck and the details in their system, that's just going to lead to more of an overall holistic approach to say, okay, we committed to being here, you know, this time range, more like parcel,
Yep.
and
So
we're going
wait.
to get it.
So what you're saying is today LTL carriers aren't measuring that, hey, I was sent this tender on Monday, but I didn't get it until Wednesday.
I've never seen that
Yeah.
metric, no. And if I've seen different ways that shippers and 3PLs score carrier performance. And in some cases, it's like if any exception occurred, whether it was a missed pickup, late delivery, damage, shortage, anything, then it's essentially a failed shipment.
Yep.
And so there's in that, with that logic, there's going to be a lot where it was just pickup was the only failure and it got rolled back to the next day, and then it was picked up, it was delivered within the transit. But
Yep.
again, that kicks everything down a day. So
Right.
when
Which
I
speaks
tendered the
to
pickup,
getting really clear on what you're trying to measure, right?
right?
So
Yeah.
it's customer delivery is the utmost goal. Is on-time pickup performance, does that matter? Because I think you've seen it too, where this appointment process, so just say that example of the grocery warehouse who is supposed to deliver on 2/5 based on shipper order date, but they won't take an appointment until 2:15. And so we, in good partnership, are going to work with the shipper to move that pickup date ahead, because you don't want to give it to the carrier and ask the carrier to hold on to it, right, for 4 to 5 days. And so, to your point, if you're not changing that target pickup date, you're now measuring a bad date. It's showing as failing, but it's not.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then to add on to that, I think we need to have more granularity on just the tracking and the transit updates. Like if I'm a carrier and I have that freight at my delivering terminal and I want to deliver it because I'm not a warehouse, I'm not in the business of storing freight. I want to
Yeah.
get it off, my dock and off my truck. And I go either try to make an appointment through a portal or whatever, through a phone call. I think that should be a tracking update through the API tracking. Like
100%.
you and I sitting in here looking at our TMS with our customers' freight, we should be able to say it arrived at the delivering terminal at this date, at this time. Here's, their first attempt at scheduling appointment, whether it was successful or not. So it's kind of interesting when it comes to pricing and different things in LTL. I typically say we need to be more first principles driven and not as many, 8,000 different variables to get the right answer. But I
Yep.
think on the service and operations and performance side, we almost do need more granularity and not just, hey, it was at this terminal, it's now headed to this terminal, but you don't know exactly where it is.
Yep.
I know there's security concerns and, there's
And are we getting some? So there's also, I think, as you're talking about tracking, there's no real standard in the industry for LTL carriers for what they're going to send you for tracking, right? Because
right,
we do see in some cases where LTL carriers, they're delivering the messaging of when they planned the appointment. They're saying 2/5, reach out, 2:15 appointment. And then other carriers, we're simply not getting anything, and our teams are reaching out to say,
right.
hey, have you called for this appointment and did you secure it yet?
Yep.
Is it still a mixed bag?
It is a mixed bag. Yeah. It's almost like that tracking, message or API call, if that's how you're
Yeah, yeah.
tapping into it. It should be broader. It should just be like a shipment status call or something where, the
Yep.
carriers that also send over what they show as the current rate, um, with, in that call itself, that's great information too, because then you can jump on if there has been some sort of, reweigh or some sort of rate change. You don't have to wait till the invoice comes. So
And then where you're like so deeply in the industry, are they talking about this more, and from a, like, we're just speaking to tracking right now and like planning of freight, or is it being talked about more? You see some carriers providing it, but even those carriers, there's more there they could be sharing with you as a shipper or a managed trans provider digitally, and they're not. Is it a bigger concept now? Is it being talked about more?
I believe so. Yeah. I think across the industry, um, just up to date, accurate information and more visibility is kind of that's the expectation. That's what we need to get to.
Yeah.
And if carriers are always like requesting that of their customers, give us accurate data sooner so we can plan, they know that they also have to return the favor in different ways. And
Yeah.
it's a partnership. It's a two-way street. So
And is that, if you're a shipper, I mean, I think we don't want to speak for all shippers, but what we've seen in the industry as a shipper, because we are essentially the transportation department of all of our customers, as a shipper, we are really, we're pulling for more and more and more and more. I mean, again, conversations around partnership with carriers aren't just about pricing. You're having these very deep dive conversations about performance metrics, and we want them. We want to consume them digitally. Was that safe to say? And then, what is the carrier? So, as like Curtis, being in the industry as you are, kind of on both sides in the partnership, you're representing the partnership of carriers and shippers. So shippers are looking for more info on tracking and planning appointments. What are carriers looking for? What are they talking about in 2024? And as it relates to performance, that they're kind of saying, hey, we need this from you, industry.
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say in that, on that scale, carriers are quite a bit further ahead with, they're still just wanting accurate weights and handling unit counts and
Right.
dimensions and just kind of the basics that they still
Yeah.
don't get from a lot of shippers.
Yep.
So, they've kind of mastered that part of it. They have a much better idea now on weights and cube and everything because it directly impacts their costs. So they're
Right.
motivated to build that out and have that intelligence. The stuff we're talking, with this more granular and like a future pre-pickup visibility and better tracking visibility, that's truly the next step we need to take as an industry. But I do think shippers and 3PLs we have to do our part, and it can't, the transportation piece can't just be the last unthought of piece. It's
No.
when customers they still can't give a total weight as the freight is going to be tendered to their carrier, and they're just pulling, from their ERP or WMS, these automated carton weights. It just, we need to get better at that, I think, on the input side.
Yeah.
So there's definitely improvements all around. And there are so many variables that are just out of the shipper and the carrier's control,
Yep.
especially when it comes to the delivery. But again, we're in, we talk about the data, we talk about all this technology. At the end of the day, it's a physical service based industry, right? Like,
Well, it's interesting you went here too, because as you're talking, what I'm thinking about is, so we at Freight Plus, we offer all of this technology and products, and we're building our own products to get this digital environment in one platform, all your orders, all your tracking information, all your financial information. But to your point, we're receiving orders from customers, and again, in good partnership, these orders are not complete enough to give the carrier what they need in order to execute from. And so we're still in a bit of this hybrid model where, because the shipper can't give us pallet positions, or because the shipper can't give us cube or an accurate weight, we're having them bring that to us in a manual process. So they're adding to the digital order in order to execute effectively. And then on the other side of it, where the carriers aren't bringing us good digital information, like tracking updates that are needed, we have a whole team manually tracking and bringing those updates into the data visibility for our clients. And so I think, again, like I just keep going back to this partnership.
yeah,
And it is a human, it's still men and women picking up freight and trying to show up on time and trying to get loaded on time, and all that impacts performance. And then with, the technology and the team and the tools and the process, that's all part of it. And tech is not going to take all that away. You
yeah,
still need that subject matter expertise around it.
yeah. I think we all need a bit of a perspective shift. I was actually just thinking about this yesterday on one of the trails because that's what I do. I think about
You think
LTL
about
instead of
freight
O&M.
as you're hiking.
Yeah. I was thinking about, like, a company that is providing a product or a service, a vendor of some sort. In other industries, like, say, when the pandemic hit and everybody suddenly needed a Zoom account,
Yep.
or Microsoft Teams, or like I was thinking, Zoom Info, like this company that's blown up and provides, prospect and company insights. Like nobody that uses those products sees them as like, hey, you screwed me on pricing this month, or like you didn't do what you said you were going to do. They see it as like an enhancer to their business. They
Right.
can find the right prospects, they can land the right accounts, they can communicate with their
Yep.
customers. And I think it'd be interesting to look at LTL and just transportation in general that way, instead of like, here, I'm giving this to you, this freight, it's on you now, and when you mess up, I'm going to be right there to point the finger at you, or vice versa. We did our part. If I'm the carrier, and hey, you set us up for failure,
Yes.
I think if we should all look at, choose your carrier because it's an enhancer to your business and ultimately getting your product in your customers' hands. And I guess that just the biggest shift there maybe is, again, just price motivation only. Just it has to expand beyond that.
It does. And it's really surprising all these years later in the industry. We work with companies and they will tell us what's the most important to them is serving their customer, right? We need to service our customers. It's so important to them. And to your point, they completely leave this part of their program in their order management cycle to Excel, to an Excel file, and then without support of the right people to actually find the right carrier. And I'll say it again. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it's where that partnership comes in. It is not a request for pricing. It is a request for partnership. So I think this is a good segue into what we're going to talk about next, Curtis, because we'll probably spend some more time here. And you have dripped this on us every time we talk, and I think can continue to do so. So if we can flip to the next slide, it's really around that, the shipper and the consignee performance. So you can measure when it picked up, when it delivered, was it on time, did it meet the appointment date? But talk a little bit about, because it is around operations, but it's very important that you can measure these things, and because it enhances your partnerships with your carriers. And when you do that, what do? You get a better service for your customers, right?
Yeah, this to me is a no-brainer. And we talked about this in the last webinar where we said, instead of just going to your carrier and trying to beat them over the head with an in or a decrease request, why don't you actually take something specific to them, measure your
Yes.
dwell time, improve it, and then take that to them and say, hey, I've got some imperial evidence here that your pickup or delivery cost at my location should now be reduced because we're getting you in and out quicker. And there's advancement happening in that realm too. Lance Healy's got his new company, Freight Facts, that's not live yet, but it's essentially a shipper score or a consignee score. It can be based on dwell time being a big variable, but all kinds of things that essentially make a shipper or consignee location just good for the carrier partnership.
Yep.
There's honestly this. I love when we get the chance to go on site with customers and look at this stuff, because it's usually stuff that maybe they didn't even consider. Like they're just like, hey, the carrier only exists in my eyes when they bump the dock and when they're heading down the highway with my freight.
Yeah.
But if you look at all these little things and you made incremental improvement, there's a good book called Atomic Habits that I read a couple years ago.
It's a great book.
And I think it's one of the first stories is about the new coach of the English cycling team, David Brailsford, I think his name was. And he came in, they had several years of poor performance in the Worlds, and he just deconstructed the whole thing. And he changed the pillows they slept on, and he changed, the lube on the chains, and just all these little unthinkable things that typically are just glossed over. And within a short period of time, they started winning and consistently won. So all those just incremental improvements, like if you looked at every single variable in play from when the LTL carrier pulls onto your lot Do they have to go through a gate? What does that look like? Is it more, is it more truckload centric? Are you sending them into a hole to sit for an hour and wait for, a lumper or whoever? Like there's so many little improvements and enhancements you could make there just to make that whole exchange. That's a transaction there. Company shows up, you're giving them something to take care of, you're paying them for it. That specific little event is a service product in itself, and both sides matter. Like
Yes.
carriers at times have drivers that are unruly, and we'll
Yes.
so often get an email. Your driver didn't back into the door we needed him to. They took off. We were just finishing up one last order, and they left. There's so many things on both sides, and I don't think it's always just like it can't be left to they'll do the right thing. Like you hope people
No.
do, but there's thousands of people in play here, hundreds of thousands, across all the warehouses and all the carriers in the country. So you need to have a standard for what
Well,
that transaction looks like.
and you're right. A lot of times it's really just the collaboration and understanding exactly what's going on. We see it all the time where I would recommend if you are in a VP up mid, if you own the strategy around your supply chain and you haven't sat in your shipping set warehouse and see what they go through to actually get an order to a shipment to hand over that document, the paperwork to the driver, you need to do that.
Yeah.
We've been in warehouses where it takes literally 19 to 26 manual steps for somebody to just get a bill of lading and a manifest handed over to a driver. These folks aren't trying to make the driver wait. You've made their process painstaking, right? And
Yeah.
so you can even, again, when you talk about length of time to unload and also this like readiness for the carrier, if just like you're talking about like measuring your lead time, measure what those folks in the shipping site have to go through to get this bill of lading printed and the driver in and out of the warehouse with the freight. You'd be really surprised, and there's probably tools that you can help support these shipping teams with so it isn't as painstaking, but you should definitely see it. So we have a question here I'm going to grab. Hi, Curtis. Do LTL carriers keep data on facility requirements, and do they use it to help shippers/brokers fill in any information gaps regarding receiver/delivery? Seems like a good shared data could avoid some rate surprises.
Yep. Thanks for the question, Alex. Alex from Expedite All. Um, that's a great question. I think it's an opportunity for some innovation and improvement in our industry. I think each
Yeah.
carrier at a local terminal level likely has their own, records or notes or just tribal knowledge about specific facilities, customers. But I remember when I was a driver for Old Dominion, all I was given was the address, and then if there was an appointment time or something like that. But I was constantly calling other more experienced drivers when I was new, like, hey,
What's
what's
going
the
on?
procedure here? Because
Mhm.
there's all kinds of crazy, you know, unofficial rules and regulations, like which warehouse door you walk in after you back
Yes.
into the dock, which dock door to back into, where you
Yeah.
can go, where you can't go. Sometimes you step into the warehouse and you're in this little driver cage and you just can't even, it's like a eight
No.
by eight little box. You can't even get out of that.
Yeah.
So I
And
think,
we see it too with when we go through the RFP, the strategy around sourcing. We bring in a new client. Part of our implementation is to get this tribal knowledge out of them, what happens at their shipping sites and at their customer receiving locations. And a lot of times they don't know. And our teams are actually going to the carriers to get this information like, hey, you're handling this freight already today. Can
yeah,
you tell me what the service looks like at delivery and or pickup? But to your point, Alex, there's no, it's all tribal knowledge that we end up trying to kind of peel an onion one at a time, a layer at a time, and then we're consuming that information in our location masters so that we know and our customers know. But you're right. I don't know, Curtis, that there's like that carriers do a good job of keeping that information.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, that's what freight facts will kind of help solve, but that's more of just a performance, score around it. But as far as like, this is more, on a facility level, having kind of a profile,
Yeah.
and it shouldn't really change carrier to carrier or even mode to mode. Um, so anytime I see something where something is universal to all providers, but yet we're all just like, trying to build out and stay current with the same set of information in each of our own little silos,
Yep.
that's an opportunity. The way Shiplify kind of broadened the definition of a location, whether it's limited access, residential, what have you, I think there's probably an opportunity for somebody to do that, the same thing from just, if you're an LTL driver, you're going to this facility, or you're a dispatcher, you're trying to plan for your drivers to go. Here's the pertinent information from a profile level that
Yep.
would really help inform your planning for that day.
Yeah. And then when it changes, let us know. That happens. We're trying to gather it at the location as a location management process here at Freight Plus. And then when it changes, you try and get ahead of that. And you don't always get ahead of it because you're not told.
Yeah, I think it needs
Great
to be
question.
outsourced. If the
Yep.
shipper or receiver can be convinced that providing that nuance to their provider will
Yep.
in turn make sure they get better service, then the incentives would be there for them to keep it current, keep it accurate.
Definitely. I agree. Okay,
Thanks,
so
Alex.
thanks, Alex. Last questions around, or last thing I want you to talk about with us is really around the digital performance and then how that translate into invoice procedures. I'm so excited. I wasn't sure that EBOLs are going to be here, but as we were talking about, how can you being ready at pickup for drivers, I was thinking about EBOL. So I'm happy to see this on here. So if you could talk a little bit about digital performance. Again, if you're going to measure metrics in partnership with your carriers, it's not just the metrics of how the order moved and did it pick up and deliver on time, but really how they're supporting you and how you're supporting them in a digital environment. I want to be very clear that all of this digital environment that you can put yourself in as a shipper isn't just good for you, it's good for your carriers. It's showing good partnership if you can provide your carriers a digital environment to work in. And then having that digital environment, it's not easy. Again, there's no standards here. And so
Right.
it's really hard to pull off. And I think that honestly, not to put a big plug out there, but that's where like a managed transportation service like Freight Plus.
Yeah, I think we're getting those standards. There's definitely now like a API EVOL standard um, that anybody can build to at this point, and it's just purely a value add for everybody involved. Um, but this digital performance, really, this is kind of like the umbrella category that trickles down and touches shipper, carrier, and consignee, and everybody benefits from it. But then everybody kind of has their ask and their part to play, and needs to be accountable as well. Um, so I
So
mean,
as
just
a team at Freight Plus, you're measuring what carriers like ranking digital performance. Is it API, EDI? Let's just say EDI invoicing. You're measuring. Well, I think we're going to go there next, but it's probably a bad example. But you're measuring. Look at carrier. This is what you said your capabilities were for digital environments, and then we're measuring against that.
yeah, I think that's something that not enough companies do yet. Just measuring literally the digital performance around
Mm-hmm.
accuracy, you know, uptime, latency, like speed and getting quotes and tenders, like that. That's all hugely important.
Yep.
That's what you saw, in other industries like financial trading and whatnot, when it was just phone calls and humans yelling across the room to then these precision high speed transactions. Um, that's what matters here as well. And just I was thinking about this a bit ago, just to put something in perspective. Like at the most basic level of why we all need to enhance our digital performance in trucking transportation. Um, how many decades now have we been able to wire transfer or basically electronically send millions of dollars around the globe from
Yeah.
one country to another, at the click of a button, essentially, right? But yet, still, you have a shipper that has all this digital product and order information in their system, and then they're just printing it onto a piece of paper that's physically handed to a driver who then has it, and the driver can enter a few quick pieces of info into their handheld unit or whatever they have, so that their dispatcher and their terminal can kind of get a heads up. But to fully consume all the information on that bill of lading, the carrier needs to completely digitize it again.
Yeah.
And so,
Yep.
just that simple thought of, we're so advanced in so many other industries and markets because the incentives were there. You don't want to physically transport $1 million or 100 gold bricks around the world. You gotta be able to digitize it and
Yep.
send it electronically. And so this is where I kind of put, like, I'm glad the carriers are really pushing for it now, but in a lot of ways they've allowed it for a lot of years,
Right.
and they've carried these huge costs, ton of overhead and room for error with manual data entry for, whether they do it in their headquarters or whether they outsource it to somewhere else in the world. I think it's just gone on for far too long. So I'm excited for when the API EBOL is just, mainstream, and just the commonality. That
Yeah.
that one piece of this will just be a game changer for the whole process.
And then really important, if you're a shipper, if you have tendered that EBOL and something changes on the characteristics of your shipment, you need to do it again.
Right.
Right? And that's the getting the digital environment to match what's happening in real life. We see a lot where we're tendered an order with X amount of weight in it, and then day of pickup, we find out from the carrier that it's like double the size of it was. Well, that doesn't work. If the order details change, you need to notify order detail change, whether it's digital or not, so that you can execute and then measure this digital performance accurately.
Yeah, that great point, and that's why I think the only like future solution there is just a, a digital ledger, essentially, of,
Yeah.
if I'm any company involved, if I'm managing this from Boston, if I'm the carrier picking it up in North Carolina, like, I need to be able to see at any time a log or whatever changed, because sometimes you'll have three different records of the same shipment. You'll have whatever the carrier finally truly picked up, and they weighed and measured it. You'll have what's in our system, our TMS, that was sent to us through the customer integration.
Yep.
But then maybe they made some last minute changes, and they like crossed out a weight or hand wrote, something extra on the hard copy bill of lading on the floor in the warehouse. So that, anytime you have that potential for discrepancy and just for multiple parties having different information, like, it's no wonder that 20 to 30% of LTL moves have discrepancies.
Well, and then it's no wonder if we go right into our invoicing procedures. One of the things that Curtis and their team have implemented here at Freight Plus around invoicing procedures to combat this exact issue is that live audit. And so essentially, as much as we're using, if we can hit the next slide, as much as we're using live audit to get timely invoicing, you're also using live audit to audit the accuracy of digital performance against what's really going on, right?
Right.
uh, which is huge. And so, Curtis, I think I want to repeat what you said, because it doesn't just happen sometimes; it happens all the time, where
Hmm.
we receive a digital order from a customer. That order is tended to a carrier. things change in between, and now there's 3 different digital environments on the same order that tell a different story, to the point that we have now staffed a team to manage just that, to audit that digital performance, and then work with our clients who are shippers on behaviors, not just the digital behavior, but really getting the workflow in on the order management cycle to say, okay, trigger something change, that is a lever to pull. Pull a digital lever when something changes. Pull it when it changes here, pull it when it changes there, so that we can drive all of everybody on the same page in terms of how we're supposed to be managing, executing, and what is in that order, so
Right.
their customer can get it in full and intact on time.
Yeah, absolutely. We're basically aligning or realigning all of those digital, physical, and financial variables that are
Yep.
involved with, a single LTL shipment. And honestly, I think if more companies start doing this, it's really going to eliminate to some extent like the traditional just post audit of looking at an invoice, looking at carrier contract or pricing agreement, and saying, "Oh, there's a lift gate fee. Oh, the contract says it's $50. The invoice says $50. Check, all good." They're not asking, did this shipment need a lift gate delivery? Is that from a physical location level perspective, was it needed? It's just, yeah, charge matches what the client agreed to. So
I think the other thing I heard you say is that when you're looking at invoice performance, most folks are doing it in the rear view. They're waiting for that invoice to come in, which, we measure it every day. Once a shipment delivers, we are chasing carrier invoice, right? So when does that invoice come in? And then is it accurate against what you negotiated? And most people, most companies, most 3PLs, most carriers are handling that when the invoice is received.
yeah,
And what you're talking about, and again, it's we're doing it for many reasons, but the idea of the live audit is, one, to audit that the digital environment is working, two, to get ahead of anything that could happen in transit with that shipment, to change your planned rate.
yep,
Imagine the struggles that finance teams go through trying to get accurate freight accruals. Well, imagine a live audit. Not only are you measuring invoice performance, like if as you should be, you're also getting in front of it. So when that invoice actually arrives, it's already been completely vetted. The right service has been added, and that planned rate that you were originally provided when you shipped it is going to be the invoice rate when it comes in. And I think
yep,
it's might be surprising for people to hear an LTL, 30% of the time, your planned rate is not your invoice rate, because so much
right.
happens in transit with that shipment.
Yeah, we're just keeping things on course. Uh,
Yes.
if you take off from Los Angeles and you think you're going to New York, but you land and you're in DC and you had no idea, it's like, what the heck? What changed?
Yep.
But we're just nudging, keeping things on course and doing it in real time so that either you stay on course, or if there is a change, you're going to know about it when you're over Nevada, not like walking off the plane in DC.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this was great. We've covered a lot. If there's any questions, would love to hear from you. I think the other thing, if you've tuned in for today and you're thinking about all of this and where to even begin, please feel free to reach out to us. We see it over and over again. Uh, Measuring performance the right way is hard. And we see a lot of companies living in Excel files, trying to get some visibility into these metrics. And my ask of you in the audience is, if you're one of those people or one of those companies that's living in Excel, really trying to understand performance around all the things we talked about today, please, please, please reach out to us. We would love to talk to you about it, for sure. And so you can hit us up on LinkedIn, Joe Clifford and Curtis Garrett. You can hit us up on our website. We're so grateful you're here. If you're not here and you're recording, we'd love you to listen in. And again, reach out to us anytime with any questions. Curtis, I'm sure we have another one coming. So as always, to the audience, if there's any ideas or anything you want us to talk about, please don't hesitate to let us know.
Thanks, Jill. Yeah, this was great.
Curtis. Appreciate it. Okay.
All right.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.